So welcome to Archetypes in Coaching, a fireside conversation I'll be having with Jamie Clarke. For those who don't know me, my name is Jevon Dangeli. I'm the course leader of the Transpersonal Coaching Psychology course at Aleph Trust. And in today's session, we'll be exploring the value of working with archetypes in a coaching context. Our conversation partner today is Jamie Clarke. Jamie is a certified transpersonal coach who has been teaching yoga for over 20 years. He's inspired by yoga as a means of mind-body integration, as well as psycho-emotional and spiritual transformation. He has been mentored with several of the Western world's yoga most renowned masters and has led over 100 transformational teacher trainings. He brings a yogic meditation discipline and philosophy within a Western depth psychology approach and process. Jamie has perused his own psychotherapeutic journey since 2007. He has a master's degree in psychology. He has an established practice and is a licensed transpersonal psychotherapy counselor, taking an integrative, transpersonal and psychodynamic approach. Jamie is also a graduate at Aleph Trust, having completed both the MSc and the Transpersonal Coaching Psychology course. So Jamie, it's delightful to have you back in the space. Welcome.
Hello group, thank you very much. Very much honored to be here this morning. I hope we can really enjoy a great session together, some questions and so forth. So I'd like to begin with a meditation, if that's okay. If everybody would like to take a moment to take a comfortable seated place, close the eyes. If you'd like to position the pelvis so you can sit with a straighter spine, that's ideal. Tune inside. Feel the whole body, its space, its volume. Really anchor into the internal experience, perhaps feeling the breath. Easily, gently, naturally, drawing in. Releasing out. And really come to a sense of self, perhaps to the belly or to the heart. Just really anchor into a place, an altar, a center. And really just with your awareness, move throughout the body gently, calmly, and really feel the space, the volume, a sense of deep presence, full connected awareness to your inside. Equanimously, and almost feeling the sense of the witness, watching. Allow yourself to experience the various sensations that you have inside. Allow your focus of attention to draw towards one particular sensation that this morning is really expressing itself to you. Allow the awareness to really connect with that sensation. Really feel that sensation or that part of the body, or that visceral experience really express itself in whatever way it needs to. Allow space for that full expression of that particular sensation or part that has drawn your awareness to really communicate. Now notice how perhaps you feel about that sensation, about that expression. Notice if you have a sense of wanting to come closer, or perhaps rejecting, or a judgment. Notice how you feel towards that part that's expressing itself to you this morning. Notice any other part of you that's also has a reaction to the part that's being focused upon. If it has a reaction, any other parts of you that seem to feel reactive, or connected in some way to that part that's really expressing. Notice what they have to say and what they feel, and then just ask them to relax. Just ask those parts to relax for the time being, as this part really is being given the invitation to express. Returning full attention back to that part, ask it if it has something in particular it wants to say to you this morning. Perhaps a message or a warning. And now allow it to express that if it feels concerned, what would it feel like if it didn't express What would it feel like if it wasn't able to really communicate to you in this way, in this sensation? What does it perhaps feel would happen if that couldn't really take place? And lastly, take a moment to thank the part, to thank it warmly for being part of you. To let it really know that you really care, you're listening, and you're connected, and that you will inevitably return to connect with it connect with it again very soon. Thank it for being part of you, and really reassure it that you'll be back to listen, to it again very soon. Just take a couple of deep breaths. And return back perhaps to that anchoring point of the belly of the heart before gently opening your eyes and returning once again to your outside space. All right, thank you for that brief connection to a part of oneself. And I'd like to now share the screen and just run through the just a couple of slides to go and talk about the archetypes and how they are classically understood, and perhaps can provide a framework for our discussion that's coming next. So I'm going to share the screen. How's that? Can people see that? Okay, I'm just going to really read from the screen because I want to kind of land some key points about archetypes and how they've been thought about in the past or classically, and then that will provide a framework for where we can see how we fit as coaches or therapists in the world of archetypes, and how it can relate to ourselves and how we can work with other people. So archetypes are recurrent impressions created by subjective reactions, our history of human experience, something that has happened previously. This means that something happens and it leaves an imprint on humanity, i.e., the different ways one is likely to react in a situation. This is what we actually inherit. We are predisposed as humans to instinctively live and react in certain ways in our human lives. Just like an example of migrating birds. These ways are not learned, they are instinctual. Archetypes are identical psychic structures, common to all, which are heritable and influence all humans' experience in the world. Archetypes cover thoughts and behavior, myths, religions, cultures, society and family. If we really look at classical thinking, we have to honor the work of Carl Jung, who divided the self into three layers: the conscious mind, the feelings, emotions, sensations, the personal unconscious, which would be experiences, personal, irrelevant, or repressed, suppressed, that are painful, or socially rejected, urges, taboos. Or painful trauma. And the collective unconscious, which also included experience of feelings, emotions, sensations on the wider field of humanity, and are sort of groomed into themes, and they push up from the unconscious to the conscious and have a flavor of acting directively or more well known, acting compensatory, to compensate to what one is experiencing in our life. Eric Newman, a famous student of Jung, shared the experience that the collective unconscious is very much like having organs which we have prior to birth in vitro or in the uterus, and they have, they need to be, they have an imprint. We're born with those organs, and then they develop, and their health is very much informing, the health of the infant and the individual as we grow, and very much like organs previous to birth, and we take those organs as we inherit into our lives, into our actual lives. The archetypes are the same, but more on the psychic phenomenon. We have these sort of psychic organs that we carry with us. And famously, Jung in the Bergoldsli Institute in Zurich studied the experiences closely of his psychotic and schizophrenic students, and noted the delusions and visions, that they had common patterns and resonances and imprints that had come from cultures, folklore, myths that were separate from their own personal, actual life experience. And these obviously linked symbolism, deity, and sort of folklore that were common to religions outside. So it's almost like they were connecting into a larger database. So through myths, there's one way the unconscious speaks to us in our innate, and our innate knowledge can tell us through mythology and can really experience an archetype. Jung found that irrespective of time and distance, we all have access to a universal memory or consciousness. And lastly, I'd like to just go through that this comes through family constellations. It's almost through our family, our lineage, our inherited experience has these archetypes, these flavors of experience, behaviors, even they're showing characteristics of orientation in our lives and personality, has come through these sort of family constellations. These ideas, meanings, experiences, symbols, motifs are embedded in our unconscious, and they're imprinted and penetrate our consciousness through our families, cultures, religions, and societal, and even through the era of society within which we live. And Jung felt very strongly that the conscious mind was dwarfed by the strength and power of the unconsciousness that really pushes up that which needs to be observed, needs to be balanced, resolved, needs to be quote unquote healed. And this really provides the altar for where we can work with these archetypes in the relationship with our clients, in the work that we do as coaches and therapists. I'd like to stop there, but I do have further slides which really talk about how we work with, but I would like to cover those. Maybe I'll dip back if necessary, but I'd like to cover those through the questions. So I'm going to unshare, if that's okay, and come back to the group where I'll hand it back to Jevon to direct us further.
Jamie, thanks for the introduction, for your meditation, and for answering the first question I had on my mind, which is, what are the archetypes? And before I ask a follow-up question to that, I'd just like to invite you all to ask your own questions at any stage so that we can have a conversation. Let's explore this topic together today and not leave Q&A to the very end, which is usually the best part of such a gathering. So please do feel free to ask your questions as we go. I know that there's a great depth of knowledge and wisdom in this room with us today, and I happen to identify some names and faces here who I know are actively coaching with archetypal themes as well. So then that leads to my next question, and please ask yours. And if you have questions, we would favor you unmuting and asking them out loud as opposed to putting them in the chat window, just so that we can generate some conversation between us today. So to get that conversation started, Jamie, my follow-up question is, how do archetypes show up in a coaching relationship? How do coaches identify the existence of an archetype, and what are the cues or indicators that they can identify, first of all?
Well, I mean, I know classically in a psychodynamic approach would be to go back into the history of a client, but more, I think even even in this discipline, in more contemporary times, the approach is very much in the here and now. So what we're really looking at is what's presenting itself with the client in their own current real-time experience. So if we're talking about, as an example, an issue a client has, and if there is even if it's a conflict with external objects, or objects is the term that psychologists use for people, with external people, or in a relationship or a family structure, you're really looking to see where those relationships are rooted internally with the client. That would be an example, say a struggle between mum and dad, or a struggle between brother and sister, or struggle between husband or friends and so forth. We're looking to see where there's incongruence or misalignment, or literally a sort of struggle for power within the client itself. Alternatively, if a client comes to the session and it's really their experience is sort of indecision, perhaps ambivalence, a sense of not being able to connect to a decisiveness. You're looking for really what's blocking that flow of energy, that clarity, and then this is where it leads into really, and this is why I began with the parts, which is very very much an add-on. I've considered an add-on discipline to family systems theory of Murray Bowen, the internal family systems of Robert Schwartz. His use of internalization and a real sort of dialogue with one's parts that are really operating in this conflict or within this issue. So it's looking at the parts, looking at what's represented within oneself, and then we can kind of look at those archetypally as almost like personalities or separate entities themselves, and they can be anchored into, you can go back and see them in the family of origin with the client, or you can just deal with them, as they are, and really get to know them, and really get to know why they feel they need to act out or express or bully or sublimate themselves to other aspects of the self. And so we're looking to, in all the processes, we're looking to really hear, listen, hear, understand, and move towards a sense of mutual understanding, connectivity, empathy, attunement, bringing together those parts. So one is not really taking power from the other. And with that clarity, if we take that through a therapeutic or coaching process, just getting the client to go into the parts positionally or orientationally. I feel this, and it's almost like an interview at times. But also the parts can talk amongst themselves. That you ask them how they feel about each other, what would happen if they didn't express, what are they frightened of. You know, as you know, working psychodynamically, I then often link that back to parental figures in their lives, which I personally feel is very powerful, but not really in a way to go back into trauma necessarily, but more to go back into understanding where this has been copied up and reenacted, almost in a thespian play, to really present the issue. And you can see the resonances. Oh my God, I'm playing out mum and dad, or oh my God, I'm actually in conflict with my brother and sister. But it's really important for these parts to kind of hear themselves, hear each other, and then there's a sense of self. How do I feel with each part? And often you cannot sense a mixture within a part or a self, as oneself, and it's often mum or dad coming in, and it will be like, mum, please just step back for a moment. I just want to talk to this part alone. And you can really separate oneself out from any coercive influences that might have happened in the family of origin and really come back to it's the clarity we want in the process. And once you have that clarity and that feeling within each that's honored, then it kind of the resolution organically happens and starts to untangle, and the client finds their solution themselves. It just flows to a resolution. Or if it doesn't, it just one's clearer with what's operating within, and then it's a matter of time for that to come to some type of harmony. So the solution presents itself in so many cases.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. That'll make a lot of sense to some people here, and others may have questions there, so feel free to ask. What's occurring to me, Jamie, after that is parts do show up in coaching conversations. They always do. It's the coach's responsibility to identify when that happens, and then to respect the part on its terms. So the client may express, there's a part of me that wants this, and there's another part that wants that. And these parts might be in conflict, and the client is seeking clarity, decisiveness, integration, essentially. And so the skill set to identify and promote that integration seems to be a very important one for us as coaches, I'm sure for all types of practitioners in this field too. And in transpersonal coaching, it's all about integration. It's all about working with the parts as they show up in the process, and holding a compassionate space for those parts, which in turn promotes integration. And Gabor Mate's work is very much about that as well.
Yeah.
And similar to internal family systems, we too are identifying parts, but rather than going, oh, that's this type of part, and I shall therefore name it as such, or it's this characteristic, and therefore I'm going to call it a firefighter, or I'm going to call it a that, or a this. What we do in transpersonal coaching is we literally use the words the client has used to describe something, and we feed that back to them and help them to go meta, to gain that perspective of something that is occurring to them. Whereas before they were completely wrapped up, caught up in the process and not even
Really.
aware. There was no distance between the self and the experience. It was all just one enmeshed identity. So establishing a difference, as you put in your meditation, between the witness or observer and that which is being observed or witnessed, helps to identify parts. That would be how we go about teaching and working with parts. But I'm wondering if you have any more depth to add to that, so that we can continue to respect what the clients raise using their words, so that they feel heard and understood, thereby held and safe to continue the process. But at the same time, question what is this? Where's it coming from? What does it need? How can coaches best work with that in the here and now? How do we work with these phenomena, these parts in the here and now, as opposed to going to the there and then of the past and taking a more therapeutic angle to the intervention?
Well, what I'm hearing is I would always anchor the experience in the body, and that comes from a yogic background. I'm a yoga teacher first and foremost years ago, so it's always a very somatic experience that has to be. Otherwise, one's sense of analysis can run away with itself, and one's judgment comes with that at times. If it doesn't have that big picture view, or that meta awareness, almost like a sense of, if a part's sad, then looking at that from a client, it often comes with a sense of criticism, which in itself is another aspect of self. If you, in the Hoffman process in California, they have a quadrinity of parts of the spiritual, the feeling body, the physical body, the spiritual self, the intellectual self, and the feeling self, and it's the same approach in this sort of transpersonal psychology approach in that process. But I would always anchor it back into the body as an experience, and then for me I always use breath, which is it's sort of connected awareness, and it has that spacious effect on the body to really move it back into out of flight, fight, a freezing, or an adaptation response, a sort of really sort of here and now, here I am with my body, and that's real. So it's sort of I would say, go to the somatic experience, go into if it's tension, how we can move that tension through the breath, out, down, up. Invite the client to really express as if they are, as if they are in a completely unconditional safe space to really express. I've had clients scream and punch pillows and God knows what. So it's another expression modality that they can really anchor into, which for me relates very much to what you're saying, which is really in the here and now, without type of imposing any other belief system which we've come through, or shame response. That's again, I'm a great one for techniques and moving it through process, but it comes from, in my approach, I tend to use a sort of intuitive approach as to what the client needs next, and they often go to that, and you just hold space for that flow. So often, if we go for a model, as we've done in transpersonal coaching, that model can move to a point, and then the solution can arrive there, or it can pause, and then it can reconvene. or something else happens where it's very spontaneous. And that's the whole approach to really the sort of client-centric approach, by really allowing the client to find their own solutions. There's a lot of confidence that comes with that, and a lot of, I'm very much at the core, I've worked through a lot of codependence myself, and it allows the clients to really separate out of this sort of codependent dynamic, which often can establish between the client and the therapist, that they feel they need the coach to sort them out. And if they're really held space in a really embodied, heartfelt way, they start to get this confidence and this sense of self-parenting, or sense of self-sustaining aspect within themselves. So I think that's something that is very important.
Yes, Jamie, thanks for that. I absolutely resonate with what you've shared there, and the value of a somatic-centered approach. Keep the client's attention focused on what's emerging, unfolding through the body and around the body, and give voice to that, and allow the expression thereof to inform the coaching process in the here and now, which respects the manifestation of, you could say, deep stuff, but in the present moment.
I often get a client to say, I said, okay, you're feeling this, but really say it out loud. And now I can't say it. I feel too much shame, for instance. It's okay. Let's agree that it's in this safe space. You can say it out loud. Let's hear your voice express it. And you just hearing themselves say it, it almost makes it okay, or it provides, it leads it away from this sort of really stuffed down, bottled up feeling that so often people are locked into.
Yeah, that certainly sounds extremely valuable. And I'm glad to see a hand coming up. Kelly, is that a question from you? Please.
Yeah, thank you, James. This is really useful. It's just a question. So when I was working with a client recently, so a part, I would say, came up, a fear part came up, and this is really about her relationship with herself. So rather than give a voice to that part, what I've been kind of experimenting with, where she felt that part, and then where else she felt that part. So she started to create space for that part inside her body.
Right.
So we didn't give that part a voice, but allowed her to feel that part, because she often tried to avoid feelings and go into the cognitive brain and try and make sense of things. So we just held space just to feel that part.
Yes.
And by feeling that part, a new part emerged, a different wiser voice appeared. And I just wanted to check in, how important is it to give a voice to the part that's maybe heavier, or maybe a lower vibration, or the fear part? Or is it okay just to feel that part to allow another voice to emerge?
Well, again, as I mentioned, sort of using your own sense of intuition. It depends also on the relationship you have, and the depth of the relationship you have with the client, as to when you would use different tools and techniques. But if it's a more intermediary relationship you have with the client, I would get them to really, instead of confronting it head on, by speaking it out, which would certainly be more challenging. I would say, yeah, you would use techniques of, okay, just be with that, allow that fear to be, see where, as you say, see where else that fear is in the body, as if you're just allowing it to be itself. So I would use it discerningly, depending on the relationship, the client, and how you work. Some clients thrive on challenge, for instance, because they have that relationship with you, so to speak, or not to go into some clients have more narcissistic traits, And so providing them a challenge is very interesting for them. So, but I would use discernment, and I would and always anchor in the body experience and let it be first before, and build that before you're now moving into more challenging ways of working with it. Ultimately, we want it to come up, to be expressed, to be not to be pushed into a shadow part of the self, or to be shut down into the unconscious, and to really allow it to come up, to fully reveal itself. But obviously, just at times, if that relationship or that person wants to remain more introverted or internal at that time, then absolutely that would be an approach you could stay with for some time with that client.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Kelly.
Very good. Thank you.
And yeah, Jamie, for reminding us that it's so important to hold space for whatever emerges in the process. Sometimes it's best just to support the client in being present with that feeling as it's showing up. Another time to give it voice, but how do we discern? And I might say through having that deep rapport and connection with the client, which comes about through the intentionality of being that vessel that holds space for them. Good stuff. Jana.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, Jamie. You said in the beginning that archetypes are pretty much present already in the womb, so or being originated from there. If a person growing up goes through a coaching process and starts to change some beliefs or changes their attitudes and goes through a whole process of change, from your professional experience, would you say that archetypes or the archetype can change?
Absolutely. Let's say you have an archetype with your mother. You have a critical mother. If you actually work with what has come from, what's been inherited from the critical mother about oneself, or the injury that has come from the archetype, let's say that it's the mother archetype, but it's the critical aspect that we've inherited. Really, the archetype, what you're referring to, the archetypes provide the skeleton and the possibility to have that experience again in one's life. It doesn't mean you will naturally inherit that in your life. We so often does, and that's what Freud called repetitious compulsion. But if one changes the core beliefs or the feelings and allows the feelings to emerge, and we work with the feelings or the pain, the wounding, and the core beliefs, that which I don't feel I'm worthy, or I'm no good, or etc., and we really adjust those. Absolutely, we don't have to, and this is part of the healing process, automatically reenact that archetype in our life if we've done the work around it. So really, Jung points out that it's the potential to have that experience that we inherit, not the actual experience itself with the archetype. So if you've got let's say you've got the mother archetype, and that's the skeleton of the mother, and we've experienced the mother complex, and in so forth, we've got a mother complex with all that criticism. That's what we would call the complex. Would be what is the meat, is the flesh on that skeleton of the archetype. The complex provides the flesh around the skeleton of the archetype. And as you know, for the psychotherapists in the room, we can work with the complexes, and in a therapeutic process, we can reenact that and work through that. So it's really the potential that we inherit, not really the done deal.
Thank you. That makes sense. So the work is on us, I guess.
Yes, and it with that which we do, and there's parts, there's aspects we haven't completed. You bet your life you're going to see that either in this life or the next show up to bring it to your awareness to work with it.
Okay, thank you, Jamie.
You're welcome.
Lovely. And since we're always growing, evolving beings, it would seem as if there's always some more of that fleshy stuff to discover and to nurture.
So it makes it life fun. So yeah.
Indeed. Mia, your question, please.
Hello, everyone. Jamie, I would be interested to hear a bit more on like the relationship between the parts that we've now been discussing and archetypes. Like from my understanding, parts are a bit more personal maybe, whereas archetypes might be more rooted in the collective unconscious.
Correct.
Firstly, maybe to speak about that. And then also, you know, there's like certainly defined archetypes that say when we look at the feminine, there's the maiden and the mother and the gypsy and the witch and whatever. Then Jung defines certain archetypes, but then I'm reading about other archetypes with different names. And then I'm like, okay, is there a certain set of them that we can refer to, or can we literally just make up some names? Jevon was earlier referring to just, you know, using the names that a client prefers, you know, or are there more universal ones like the mother or the dad or whatever? So I'm always a bit confused if we talk about archetypes. Is there some kind of framework of archetypes and names that we can then offer to clients and work with, or is it really more subjective, which would then maybe be more parts work? I hope that makes sense.
Very good. I like it. It's a big question there. You've got two parts of the question there. I'm going to do each part if I can. So the relationship between parts, which we've been talking about, and the archetypes themselves, it's related to what Jana just asked. The relationship between the parts that we experience in our actual experience and the archetype within the collective. If you say we'd have a mother archetype, and yet in our work, our healing journey, our coaching, or in our lives, which is very much that which presents itself for us to look at, we keep having conflict with a critical feminine energy. So what's that showing us? Then we either become this sort of sublimated, adapted part of ourselves around that critical feminine attack or entity in our lives, or on the other polarity, we embody that and we become the critical feminine with our, husband or children. So the archetype sits collectively within the wider human experience, and that which we get triggered, or we presenting ourselves with perhaps an issue, we get to work with a slice of that archetype. In this example, say the critical feminine. So it's almost like we get to look at a section of the wider archetype, say of the mother, in terms of working with the critical mother, which is presenting within our lives, and it could then present as an attacking entity outside of a critical feminine person or a boss, or we have that part within us which is causing conflict in our life. So there's this sort of personal unconscious, which is related to the sort of cluster of experiences within a complex, and that's a slice of the wider collective archetype behind it. Now, why we get triggered into a overwhelming experience of, say we get triggered into a enraged critical feminine within us. This is because we're connected into the larger archetype, which is a collective experience, and this is what we call being possessed by the archetype, where the energy of the wider archetype is funneled through this sort of focus section that we're experiencing in our lives, the critical mother. And it's almost like we get swept up with the power of the collective critical feminine, which is collective. So it's all critical mothers almost sort of charge forwards, charges through us at that moment. And this is why when we get possessed by this aspect we're working at within our lives, it's as Jung saw it, it says it's very much connected to the power and the strength of the collective which is behind it. So that's the first part. Did that help to show you how it's linked from personal to collective?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so the second part of your question was the labeling or categorization of the archetypes. You know, Jung had 12 classical or sort of 12 archetypal characters that he talked about and worked with, but they came from a sort of an amalgamation of many different entities or characters throughout different cultures, mythology, and so forth. He was a great academic in mythology and symbolism. I come from a tantric yogic background, and we work with the energy centers in the spine. And so for one, say like the power center of the third chakra of Manipura, the father complex, there's the bully and the people pleaser. And when it's balanced, it's the warrior. So it depends. You're not going to see the archetypes common to each culture or to each myth. It's the flavor of the archetype, the sort of almost like the intent, to use, if I can make a non-English word, the intentionality of the archetype within its various different clothes. So the joker, the trickster, the comic or whatever, you can all be sort of clustered around that type, their orientation, their approach, their intention. So for me, in the way I work, I tend to relate it to the client's experience and ask the client, how could you describe that, or what would you like to call that part of yourself that we're working with now? Give it a name, or if you can't find a name, give it a flavor that you really resonate. So really coming back to a personal way of relating to it, rather than shoehorning that client into a universal model. Those universal models are very, very powerful. God knows that working with and teaching the chakras, it's an incredibly powerful system. Just to see everybody operate in the unconscious as they're swept up in this sort of possessed way in yoga trainings. But they're universal models. But I would always bring it back to a client's experience and how they relate to it. And it's not really making it up as you go along, but always making it relevant for one's own personal sense of authenticity, which is actually the Tantra. It is Tantra. That is Tantra, making it relevant to oneself, one's personal truth. And so I would encourage a sort of an experiential approach by the coach or therapist when it comes to a client's experience, rather than, if you say, you're being the bully, that's a universal symbol we all get when we think, or maybe it's a bully, but do you want to give it your own personal name? Yeah, I had a kid who bullied me in the playground. His name was Billy. Okay, call it Billy. So there's Billy. And bring it back to that rather than the bully, and it's bring it back to a very personal nature with the client. Did that help? I hope so.
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
Great questions and wonderful response, Jamie. Thank you. Yes, Billy the bully, Veronica the volcano, and naming these parts of ourselves with words that the client chooses and therefore resonates with is an important part of our transpersonal coaching approach indeed, because it's what personalizes the process for the client, and that's what keeps the process rolling for them and keeps them engaged. We find that to be really important, but at the same time, we want to acknowledge the existence of and the role of these universal forces that are at play behind this. So we as transpersonal practitioners need to also, do the reading, get informed about this phenomenon, because it's always there. So over to Alba and your question.
Hi, Alba.
Hi, Jamie. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
And it's interesting what you explain. I'm glad that we can share this type of work.
Yeah.
So concerning Jevon's question about how to include archetypal work in transpersonal coaching method and not making it into a classification or grid or therapeutical context. What I find very useful is to, first of all, identify the trigger, what the person is bringing, because we don't really have to look at all the archetypes. Person is coming with a concern, with a trigger, something is bothering him or her. And of course, first of all, is empathic listening and creating this health space. And after, in somatic awareness, is where you can introduce this archetype and explain how this archetype is embodying, is connecting with the person's issue. And from there, there's a participatory approach. There's a dialogue, as the first Platonic astrologers did, because astrology in its origins was active imagination, as Jung after explained. But what Jung did was going to the origins of astrology and archetypes, and it was Iamblichus, an astrologer 200 before Christ, I think, that he created this active imagination with the gods, and then in its origins, astrology was speaking to the gods, doing some rituals, offering herbs, animals, music. And the Jungian active imagination originally came from the Greeks, and that's what I discovered, and I like to apply this framework. So yeah, if you don't do something to raise awareness, then it's going to be like a classification, and okay, I'm going to tell you what you have to do. The archetype says that this is the best option, right? But if we do this participatory interaction, then we are just letting the person interact with the archetype, and then naming the archetype as well. So that could be the way. And also I wanted to mention that I also include Hillman's approach, because it's true that Jung made this very impactful approach, and he classified the archetypes, and he created this the wise man, and etc., the warrior. But at the end, Hillman was working also in the Jungian Institute in Zurich. He was the director, and he created another system, because he realized that when you are making so many classifications of the hero and trying to create all these labels. So what he did, he said, okay, let's just let the images talk to us. And that's something I also have included in my coaching approach. And it's very interesting, because in this way, in active imagination and in open awareness, in a somatic guided meditation, there is a 100% participation of the client with these images, and they receive personal messages. And well, that's been my experience. And to Jana's question about if the archetypes can change, yeah, that's what you said, Jamie. They through examining them, the objective would be to change core beliefs. But how to change these core beliefs? In my experience, is because you help the client see other happier choices that the archetype embodies. For example,
are you asking how the archetype how the archetypes change their core beliefs?
Yeah, how are you going to do that, right? So in my practice, I could look to
what happened.
It seems as if we lost Alba in mid-sentence.
Just when
So
we were
Jamie,
getting
go
to
ahead and complete the sentence to do with archetypes and the changing of beliefs in a coaching relationship.
yeah, that's the, I mean, I don't really want to go into it without her being here because it's Alba who's asked the question. So, I mean, I do know that I'm not talking necessarily about changing the archetype's core beliefs. That's the point. It's the core beliefs of the self, or one that's the sort of center of our authentic, our own authenticity, that's then under review, to really looking, and we're looking at truth here. So by looking at things from different angles and talking to different parts of ourselves, we get what reveals is an emerging, a possible emerging truth that one can then anchor deeper into. That's what I was referring to. So she's gone. Okay.
It doesn't matter. There is the recording. She will get the answer eventually.
Okay. Well, it's a sad thing that but it's technology. So I guess we were lucky to have her while we had her. So, okay. Jevon? I've lost Jevon's sound now.
Oh dear, I'm here. So Maria has a question or comment to share with us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both. First of all, going back to what we were talking about before Alba's comment, so you were making this distinction between a more personal unconscious to distinguish between the parts psychology and the archetypes, right? And how these parts are actually just a slice of a wider collective archetype unconsciousness. And so this first question is a little bit maybe redundant, but I need some clarity here. Yeah. So does it make sense at any point in the work with the client, if they are presenting issues that concern this more part psychology and the more parts related to their personal unconscious, does it make sense to bring them from there up to this more universal archetypical unconscious space, and to go, let's say, use this bottom-up approach to go higher? This is I maybe pause here to see if it's clear what I mean.
Well, the interesting thing is when you actually know that how one is let's look at the bully example. Mm-hmm. The bully, if one feels engulfed by this part, the process of allowing that part, that what one is experienced to sort of to see itself as part of a larger phenomena, which is like would be like the open awareness or the meta awareness or the collective. It does allow the charge of that part to it does, in my opinion, it does have the experience, or it does have the effect of softening that part once it knows that there's something bigger than even itself.
Yeah.
Because let's say the bully part of us can be connected to sort of a narcissistic orientation. You know, the narcissistic parts of us likes to think that we are the collective, we are omnipotent, we are God. And when it starts to see itself as something smaller but connected into something that's of a wider phenomenon, it gets a sort of sense of a mirror to itself, and then starts to, and then it can see itself and how it may be being tyrannical, or can maybe then rejecting other parts of us, or then it can be it's being dominating. So for to go from sort of like a bottom up and then connect it into a wider field of awareness for me it is helpful to show where it can be that broader picture does give us a wider, sort of like an eagle's eye to ourselves. And so did that answer? I'm not sure whether I answered.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel what I'm hearing is that the advantage of doing this bottom-up approach resides actually in bringing also awareness in the client to identify with these parts more easily in the moment that you go higher and you can see it as something it's easier for disidentification, right?
Absolutely. But and just to add on to that, if I may, if one then sees, look, I'm being the bully, and this is how bullies approach in terms of how they try to control, but also, can you notice any way where you're within your family early on you experience this bullying? And it's often when a client then sees, this is my bullying mother, that also has a great power to then give that perspective or context. Oh my God, I'm just being like my mother. I'm being like my mother. And then that gives us a channel to go in, and I know I can see my mother, how she was dominating. Maybe at that point is where you pause with the client to hold space and allow the client not to go necessarily into any trauma, if we're working from a coaching perspective necessarily, or looking at, well, do you remember how what mum might have been frightened of? And then we can relate that to that part of us that's taken over our experience within ourselves. So there's various different ways to pull out of and go wider to get that perspective, Maria. So I hope that's helped.
Yeah, and I'm actually grateful for this answer and the question that was asked before, because I think my distinction between the archetypes and the parts was actually too rigid, and I feel that intuitively I want to invite more flexibility into this distinction.
Yeah.
And then actually a question that it's similar but the other way around, like we have often people that come already with this more for example, working with plant medicines or with dreams, where they already have this more archetypical figures that are not parts, but are like really clearly, like, for example, snakes, or this really charged or mythological figures that are really, really charged with meaning, with different traditions, etc. In these cases, is it useful to use a top-down approach in which we try to go from this really expansed collective unconsciousness archetype, bringing it back to the individual psychology, part psychology, or do we actually stay in that open space and explore that with them more?
Well, there's a guy that an academic called Edinger that points out, I'm not sure of his first name, just off the top of my head, but he mentions that the difference between the symbols, and I think he could use the terms labels, or is that the symbols, really the symbols in our unconscious, and then present themselves in our conscious, they're pointing to the archetype. I think I think it's Edinger, yes. They point to the archetype, and the symbols that we experience very often do not match up to the archetypal symbols that we have in our real lives. Say, like a symbol like a cat would an archetypal representation could be a different representation. In other words, he pointed to the difference. So the ones, usually the labels or the identification to certain symbols that we have, that we can recognize, point to that which is known, that which we know within our conscious minds that we've learned. So that shape is a cat. But if it's a mixture between a cat and a dragon, for instance, or a snake with 3 heads, that points to the unknown, that aspect in ourselves which we're not conscious of, and that I would encourage that to look at what the meaning or the feeling or the experience or the context of what that strange, unrecognizable symbol that we have, say, in such like a plant ceremony or an ayahuasca ritual, that what it's pointing to. He said that these symbols that are unrecognizable can often surround an archetype that we need to look at, which is unknown. So we kind of have to do a little bit of a detective work to look at it, to see what it's pointing to. We don't recognize it, but it's pointing to a larger archetype that we could access into our unconscious and then connect the dots, if you like. And this is very much how the work of shamanism works, because I've had experience in the rituals of shamanism. It's really very abstract, and it's pointing to the unknown rather than to known references that we have on our perhaps in our personal unconscious or in our conscious awareness.
Wow. Yes. Thank you. The word that comes up here is, for me, integration.
Yeah.
And how the role of transpersonal coaches, but also like psychedelic therapists here is, I like this lens to look at the work that they're actually
point to the unknown.
Yeah.
And there we're free of identification. So again, we're working directly with experience, aren't we? It's not being filtered through the filing cabinet of the mind.
Yeah.
Which is I think is very powerful.
Maria, great questions.
Great
Jamie,
question.
wonderful, insightful responses. And so just to contextualize that, in transpersonal coaching, we've got 2 general applications of our transpersonal coaching model. And the first one addresses the first question of Maria's, which is to expand on what is emerging for the client so that they can disidentify from the part of themselves that has been triggered in any circumstance in life. And this would be our one direction of the transpersonal coaching model, to expand toward open awareness and to thereby disidentify from the part that was triggered, to gain that insight and then re-embody that. Whereas to your other question, Maria, we would take that anti-clockwise version of the model, for those who are familiar with it, and integrate the ineffable, the 3-headed snake, the metaphor, the archetype, whatever it may be, that there is for the client to gain an insight from, to make sense of, so that becomes useful and applicable in their life. So we have an application of the model for that integrative purpose as well. So this will make some sense to the transpersonal coaching students on the session today.
And it relates very much into like dream work, which Freud and Jung were passionate about. So it's the same.
Beautiful. Alba, it's good to have you back in the room with us. Did you want to follow up on your last comments and sharing that? And then we'll be heading toward closing time. So if anybody's got a question, please come up with a concise question if you'd like to have that addressed.
Yeah.
We'll make time.
I lost connection, and I will listen to Jamie's answer later when it's recorded.
Okay.
About the dream, I just wanted to add that it's very compatible to include dream work with archetypes and combine them together.
Yes.
In my experience, the dreams are tools that we can use to see what the inner self of the person is now wanting to explore. So every night we dream, and we receive these messages, and of course they are important. Of course they should be taken into account, as Jung did and Hillman did and many others. So combining the dreams with the archetype in active imagination, in open awareness, brings many insights and high awareness and synchronicities to the coaching experience. I just wanted to comment that. And that was very interesting to hear you, Jamie, and yeah, nice to have participated here with you.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise. Thank you. Yeah, I answered your question, but you can see that in the recording. But thanks for the question. And yes, dreams are very much another platform to work in connection with the archetypal approach. There's so many philosophies out there and disciplines, but if you really look at them and how the modalities of their resolution process, you can really see how the archetypal approach you can find in most disciplines and practices and philosophies. And I've been teaching chakras for almost 20 years, and when I began teaching, I had no concept of the power of the collective as it acts, or it comes, or as it informs the unconscious of the group. And we move into a chakra of the spine on one particular day, and I was astonished in front of my eyes. We hadn't gone into any type of theory or philosophy. I just said, okay, today's this day of the solar plexus, for instance, and I'd see the collective behavior of as everybody sort of acted out or were possessed by these very strong archetypes, completely in the unknown. And it was so I was definitely like convinced from that experience, just seeing it again and again, that there's something hugely powerful in the transpersonal operating. So that's why I just really wanted to, and that's why Jung and his approaches have really resonated with me. Anyway, thank you. Very good. Thanks.
Really useful. This also reminds us as coaches about the value of having open awareness and utilizing open awareness skills to enable clients to identify when they've become possessed, whether literally or metaphorically, so that we can go, okay, zooming out, I can see how I've been swept up in that experience. I can connect with the feeling in my body. I can connect with the energy of the room, and I can disidentify from all of that and make a more clear, conscious choice about how I want to or not want to engage in that process. So
if I could just add on to that, this is very relevant with the anima and the animus between couples, and how we get possessed within the couple experience. And if we can pull out of our possession in the romantic couple experience, then that would be the game changer in the relationship. So yeah, well, good luck with that, because that's one hell of a possession.
So-
Jevon, there's one more question, if that is still fitting into the time.
We'll do this as the
And,
last question. Yeah.
Yeah, it's well-being care. I unfortunately don't know who that is, but the question is, Jamie, could you say something on archetypes that are responding to a dominant archetype? So like the mother as the critical controlling mother, and maybe the rebel responding and carrying those two conflicts within. And the question is, how could the coach help with the conflict resolution?
So if we think about it more of like in how the archetype is coming in from the collective, or is the skeleton, as I've mentioned to you before, and the flesh on that skeleton is our personal experience, as in how we're experiencing the complex or the clusters of wounds around themes for us personally. Yeah, we're experiencing the critical mother. And then we go into, in reaction to that, we go into the rebellious child. To really find from those two polarities, or those two from this interaction, to really understand the experience of the critical mother. You'll often find the critical mother often, inevitably, you will find behind the critical mother is fear, guilt, and shame, or shame, guilt, and fear at the very depths, and she's frightened that the child won't be something that either that will suffer itself. So really get underneath the intention or the fears, the emotions of that critical entity, and then really understand the needs and the pain of the rebellious aspect within us. That really, and you get down to the child wanting or needing love from a parent that's in judgment or in fear. So we're getting underneath the motivations, the feelings, the deeper fears of each part of us, and from there, and it's not a one session and you're done type of experience. It's a work in process to go deeper, and to bring these parts together in understanding. Towards greater awareness, towards a sense of deeper understanding and acceptance. And then really the final part of that process in a coaching process would be to really allow those parts to be, knowing them, knowing each other, accepting them from perhaps a more authentic or spiritual place, and then bring them to a point of trust, where when I go into a part of me, or go into a rebellious part, I trust it's just an acting out of pain or fear, and then we come into a really deep sort of a sense of forgiveness for oneself, as having these parts that sometimes rush forwards and then take a back seat or fight. And so it's a movement through that sort of awareness, acceptance, trust, and forgiveness place, by allowing those parts to be and moving towards really accepting them as part of us. And then they just tend to dissolve and get softer and more agreeable, and in that process, it's sort of, as I said to Jevon in the beginning, the solution tends to untangle and present itself. I hope that was I hope that was clear and answered the question.
That's wonderful, and it really does sum up the value of holding space for the client for whatever presents, honoring, respecting what they are trying to express that they maybe don't have words to express, staying with that somatically, seeing what imagery wants to emerge, engaging with that imagery, eliciting information, whatever's useful from that archetype or metaphor. And as the coach, helping clients to attend to that mindfully, and it in turn informs the continuation of the coaching process leading toward integration. So that's how I've understood what you've contributed by way of summary now, Jamie. And as we're reaching full time, I wonder if you have any last words, just in terms of a take-home message, if any, that we as coaches or aspiring coaches should bear in mind with this archetype. Wonderful, rich topic in mind. Yeah.
What comes up for me spontaneously is right on the tail end of what I just mentioned. It's about really seeing and accepting, and going into a deeper place of awareness for self and a wider self, to really see and accept that nothing is inherently, as Shakespeare said, nothing is bad, only thinking makes it so. So it's like a really seeing or deeper awareness provides a solution of moving towards accepting and forgiveness, allowing that part that we feel weak. And this is why really working with one's vulnerability is so important, to really accept that we are perfectly imperfect humans, that we are vulnerable. And we can really see that the vulnerability is in truth a great strength of ours, because we are accepting that we are not the gods, or the gods are not perfect, or God. So it's all about accepting and awareness. I'd like to leave you all with.
Thank you so much, Jamie. That was rich and stimulating on many levels. So thank you all for being here and participating in this session with Jamie today. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, wherever you are in the world.